Today's forum, LGBT, the New Civil Rights, is brought to us with support from Outlook Media, presented today by Chris Hayes and his associates, and from the Putnam West Foundation, represented by Java Kittrick and her husband, Mark Kittrick, and their friends. Please help me thank them. Our speakers represent a range of government, nonprofit, faith, and legal entities who are passionate about this issue. Their bios are in the forum flyer, so I'll just introduce them by name and title. Please welcome Elyzabeth Holford, Executive Director, Equality, Ohio. The Honorable Ross McGregor, Ohio State Representative, 79th District. And Raphael Davis-Williams, Board Member and Associate General Counsel, ACLU Foundation of Ohio, who is on his way here right this second. So you'll see him join the panel in a minute. And I want to start us off today with our host and moderator, Mark Belletini, Senior Minister, First UU Church of Columbus. Please join me in welcoming Mark and all of our panelists.
Good afternoon. Well, things have been going on for the last 35, 40 years, haven't they? In this particular topic, I'm going to go back to 1979, toward the beginning of when this was a public discussion as opposed to a private agony for many people. I was 28 years old. I was living in the city of San Francisco, and I had just been called to serve as the interim assistant minister at the First Unitarian Universalist congregation in San Francisco. Harvey Milk, the gay councilman, and the mayor of San Francisco, George Moscone, had just been shot about half a year before I was called. I marched in the Candlelight March with 30,000 other people before cell phones. I have no idea how we got together, but we did. There was the great suicide down in Guyana. The whole city was shaken to the core. We walked around wobbly. I got called to the church. Everything was going fine, and it was my new career. People came and talked to me about all kinds of things. One day, two men came to talk to me. I didn't know who they were. They were coming to the church, but I had not met them. We talked for a bit, and I said, what do you want to talk about? And they said, we want to get married. I said, well, I guess. I didn't have time to think about this. I didn't have time to go do massive studies. There were two human beings in front of me. They clearly were in love with each other. It's not a topic we talked about in seminary. It's not a topic we talked about at all outside of seminary, any place. It was not a topic of discussion, period. We were concerned about people getting shot in the city hall, not about marriage. And so I sat there and I talked with him, and all of a sudden I said, well, yeah, I guess. And then we started to talk about what that would look like. And it was a little strange. I mean, one of them was raised LDS, like Latter-day Saints, and he said, can you seal us for time and eternity? And I said, I'm not a Mormon bishop. Sorry, but we can do a ceremony. So we worked on the ceremony. Many people were there. The parents of one of them was there. The parents of the other one had thrown him out onto the street because he was gay, and he had no communication with them. But co-workers were there and friends, about 90 people. And I did like I do for any wedding. Got all ready, got the manuscript together for the ceremony, set everything up, got up there, started to do it. All of a sudden I realized what I was doing, and I started to weep. I did the ceremony, but I did it with a cracked voice. This was 1979. And since then, I've done hundreds of such ceremonies in California and here in Ohio, in other states. I've never done a legal ceremony in Massachusetts. I have friends who have, and they actually get to say with their mouths, and now by the authority granted to me by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I pronounce you married. I don't know if I could get through that. if that happened in Ohio. The emotion would run so high. In any case, every time I do these ceremonies, every single time, parents, brothers and sisters, co-workers, second cousins twice removed, people who are at the wedding, the ceremony, the holy union, and for a long time we weren't even allowed to use the word wedding. There were state laws that said you can't call a non-legal wedding a wedding. It's used still, but some people were more careful than others. They come up to me and they say the same thing every time. They say, I get it now. I get it. What do they get? They get that these two people, these two women, these two men, have just gone through a ceremony and all the folderol that goes with the marriage. It's not cheap. And they're doing this with no legal grounding under them whatsoever. They're doing it because they actually love one another, and that's it. And all of a sudden, that fact turns people around. Because it's all about human beings and human beings. Human beings who happen to be citizens of states. But we're all human beings. And according to the law, I have the right to choose my religion. I did. Unitarian Universalist, went to school. State didn't say, and you can't do that. You're believing the wrong thing. They don't have a right. I'm a citizen. I have the right to choose my own religious faith or to deny it, as I did for a long time and say all religion was bunk. I have a right to ask the state to address a grievance. It's my right as a citizen. I have all kinds of rights, but I can't perform the marriage ceremony of my son, Tony, to his partner, Colin. I have no legal right to do that. I've done this for years, the ceremonies. It's always moving. And sometimes I still get a little weepy as I do it, or afterward. When I talk to the people in my office, I'm always amazed to hear their stories. Every single one of them is amazing what they had to do to get to that place. And some of them, that they stand up at all, is heroic. And yet they get there and they do it. I was in a relationship with a man for 16 years in California. Everyone in my church knew it. They were fine with it. When we would show up for a church dance, they'd say, come on, get up and dance. Don't hold back. Totally supported. But we had no legal standing in the state. When we filed our income taxes, we both put down single. Now, I may have had a fight with him the night before and then made up with him. That doesn't sound very single to me. But I still had to put single down. I still had to put single down. And I think one of the things that I've seen in the last 10 years, especially as state after state after state has considered this and offered legal marriage to same-gender couples, is that many people who are still very active in their congregations, their synagogues, their churches, are saying, well, my son is gay, my daughter is a lesbian, I love my children, I want to be there for them. The old system of kicking them out into the street, as happened to one of the men in my first marriage, isn't happening as much anymore. It still happens, but it's not happening as much. People are still religious, but they're thinking differently about these things. And whether they accept reading the Bible as authoritative or not, they're interpreting it through the lens of a different kind of love than they had before. So there's more and more people meeting people, because it's all about people, human beings meeting human beings who have real lives that are just as important to them as your lives are important to you. And it involves love, and it involves some commitment and taking care of each other and being there and showing up for each other throughout a long time. And I have friends who've been together 35, 40, 50 years, all without benefit of any legal help whatsoever. So I'm just starting off that way, and I'm going to ask Elizabeth if you'd like to say a few words.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I know it was really easy to get up and get here. I live really close. I just walked. But it's a little bit of a struggle for me to decide what to say, because I could bullet point for you all that we're doing at Equality Ohio. And the list is pretty long. We're a busy organization. We are a statewide organization. And we are the only organization in Ohio that is working on all of LGBT advocacy issues. It's a lot to chew off and get into, but we are doing it. But I thought, in terms of introduction, I thought I would make this personal and tell you exactly why I'm here in Ohio right now. And the reason that I'm here is because of dignity. Some of you know me pretty well. You know I'm a big reader, and I recently got to reading Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. And interesting book in many ways. But at one point, this line jumped out at me where this person actually in a concentration camp said, when you take away someone's dignity, you take away their identity. That's pretty huge, and it chokes me up. And I was listening to Mark and thinking about what he was saying. This couple getting married in San Francisco with absolutely no grounding, no legal grounding underneath them. Well, guess what? In Ohio, we have no legal grounding whatsoever. I don't know why I'm so shaken up today. It's not nerves. It's just it catches me. It's why I do this work. We live in Ohio right now in a state where, where there is no non-discrimination law that covers us. So when we talk about not having grounding, every day that people, some of you in this room included, but every day that gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people go to work, they cannot fully be themselves. They have no legal grounding. They have no absolute protection that all the rest of us take for granted in our workplace. Let's just be really honest. We all, and I don't want to say you because I share this privilege of being able to go to work every day and be exactly who I am, be able to talk about my weekend, be able to talk about what I did last night, be able to share perhaps that fight that I had the night before, which I didn't, I'm glad to say. But had I, be able to talk about it and have those normal relations that we all have, whatever normal is, but have those kind of conversations. I live in a state, we live in Ohio together in a state where bullying, 80% of bullying that happens in Ohio happens because people either think a student is gay or they actually are gay. And yet we are not enumerated in the anti-bullying law. We have students, in other words, in our schools every day without that grounding that Mark was talking about. We have a hate crimes and ethnic intimidation law is what we call it in Ohio. We have a hate crimes law that does not enumerate the LGBT community. And yet we have experienced horrific things in this year in Ohio. The murder, clearly motivated by hate of transgender African-American women in Cleveland. The beating outside of a bar right here in Columbus not all that long ago. So this is not something that's of the past. And we do not have that grounding of which you speak. If you transition in this state, we are sadly one of 5 states where you can't change your gender marker on your birth certificate. One of 5 states. It's not a top 5 list we're on there. So when I think about it, and I do get pretty choked up about it, for me, this is about human dignity. We can call it whatever we want, and civil rights is a fine place to hang our hat, but let's be really specific. It is about human dignity. And the other reason that I came back to Ohio is because the Ohio that I know, the history that I learned about Ohio, is one of economic prosperity, right? This is a place where people came to have their families, raise their families in a loving environment, be in good schools, have their jobs, and be able to work and have their living and have our being in Ohio. We had the glass city, we had the rubber city, we had the steel city, we had the economic engine of the mercantile city of Cincinnati. We have both the creative but also the knowledge city of Columbus. This is where people historically have come to raise their families and have jobs. And that includes us, the LGBT community. And we want to be included and we want to have that legal grounding, not just around marriage, but about all those rights. And in fact, let's not forget our history. We have a really proud history of during during and before the Civil War, we were part of the Underground Railroad, right? This was a place that honored people for exactly who they are and not treating people differently. And in fact, during the Great Migration north, this was a state where the trains came through and people saw land that they could own and they themselves not be owned, right? So they stopped here to raise their families, to be a part of the economic engine that we know is Ohio, that we know we can be. And frankly, I mean, I don't want to be all economic here, but it's good for business. It's good to treat people equally. People in the workforce who are not afraid of being discriminated against are actually more productive, are able to raise and love their families and be a part of the community in a way that is knitted into the fabric of Ohio, as opposed to being off on the side, being able to be discriminated against, being treated differently in taxes and everything else due to the inability to have the self-same protections that most people enjoy in Ohio. So my shaky little voice here and I get a little passionate. I came back to Ohio because of human dignity. I came back to Ohio because the Ohio I know stands up, treats everybody fairly, every day. So that's why I'm here.
Ross. Ross, respond.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you to everyone for including me today. You know, as a legislator, there are a couple ways that you measure your success during your time serving in the State House. One is if the dispatch editorializes on anything that you've done. Check. The other is if you're included as a panelist at the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Check. Now all I have to do is be mentioned in Columbus Monthly, and I will have completed my bucket list. So, you know, so I'm 2/3 of the way there. No, thank you very much for including me today on this very important topic that I am very much passionate about. I represent Springfield, the city that Elizabeth didn't mention in her geographic tour of Ohio. And, you know, Springfield is about 40 miles west. Medium-sized city, 65,000 people, primarily industrial. And it has a thriving LGBT community, very active, people who are very proud about who they are and who want to contribute to their community, and people who I consider to be my good friends. And so this is an issue as a legislator representing my community, my constituents, that I believe needs to be discussed and actions need to be taken. And while I'm sure in the course of our conversation today we will discuss many aspects of the issue of equality here in Ohio, the area that I have chosen to be actively engaged in as a legislator is anti-discrimination legislation as it relates to employment. And it is now the third General Assembly that I have introduced legislation to make it illegal to discriminate against a person in an employment, public accommodation, or housing setting based on their sexual orientation. And it's something that I really believe is necessary in Ohio. And it's, you know, twofold. I believe it's necessary because that's what I believe in my heart. First and foremost, it's the right thing to do. There's no question there. I wake up and I say, I've got to work on this. But I also look at it from a very much more practical standpoint. I'm a business owner in Springfield. I've been involved in our family's manufacturing company my entire working career. And, you know, I know what it takes to attract talent as an employer. And putting up any barrier whatsoever that could be perceived as being unwelcoming to someone to join you in your organization, you're immediately saying to a high percentage of available employees, we don't want you here. And I mean, that's the last thing that we need as employers in Ohio. I can tell you right now, as we sit here today, you know, I'm looking and struggling to find quality employees to come and work in our organization. And these are positions that range from vice president down to press operators. So I think from an employment standpoint and an economic development standpoint, this type of legislation is vitally important because it tells people that you can work in Ohio and not be judged based on your sexual orientation. It really doesn't make any difference. It shouldn't. So this is something that I've introduced this legislation 3 times, always in a bipartisan fashion. Initially was engaged in the initial legislation with Dan Stewart, former legislator from here in the Columbus area. And at that time, he and I were fortunate enough to have been able to get the legislation passed through the House, which was a milestone, to say the least. Since then, we have continued to have the discussion, and we will continue to do so. I think that I have a feeling that attitudes are changing, and this issue is one that I will continue in the waning days of my legislative career here, continue to pursue. And it would be, even if I don't get covered in Columbus Monthly, if I could get this bill passed, that'd be a hell of a lot better. Thank you for having me.
I'm going to ask a question about the state of the state right now on these issues. We've kind of walked around it. I'd like to have it maybe summarized, because one of the things that always surprises me, when I moved here from California, this was a whole different culture. It took me 3 or 4 years to figure out exactly how things work here differently than they do in California, and there are significant differences. But one of the things that surprised me was when I heard that Ohio was the state that elected the president. That's been said many, many times. I've been here since '98. This state is so important in the 50 states that people turn to us because we elect the president, ultimately. It's an odd statement, but apparently it's true. Where are we in the 50 states on these issues? Are we way behind? Are we moving ahead? Is there any movement at all that you can see and feel in your heart? Are you hopeful that these kinds of changes will happen within, let's say, 3 to 5 years?
Well, it's a lot to bite off there, but definitely I can feel it. I can feel it, but that's not enough, to be honest. And one of the great things about what we do at Equality Ohio is that we work, really doing this work takes a tremendous amount of patience, right? And I think also sort of a spiritual commitment to not just fighting the good fight, but being willing to lift things up over time. So there certainly is some art to it, but in the same breath, to do any kind of advocacy work requires that you pay attention to the science and to the numbers. So this is a good question, because if you go back to, as I was introducing myself and why I'm doing this, I painted probably a fairly dismal picture about where we are in Ohio right now. And the truth is that we have not been able to pass legislation, and not only do we have a marriage inequality amendment, but we have a superdoma in Ohio. So it looks like things are pretty much stacked up against us in a pretty huge way. However, voters in Ohio, talking about those people that every 4 years suddenly vote a little bit differently than expected, perhaps, the voters in Ohio, we pay very close attention to, and particularly on non-discrimination. This is a state where over almost 79% of Ohioans actually want to have a non-discrimination law in place that includes the LGBT population. That's actually, I'm not really smiling right now, but that's kind of huge. We've done our homework. We've been polling on this issue since our existence. We started in 2004, 2005, actually 2005 as an organization. And we have just seen steady growth on that figure. And last year, our polling, for us, that's kind of off the charts. But when you break that down a little bit more elementally and get granular with that information, small business support is huge. Literally, polling done not by us, but by the small business majority shows that, let me make sure I get my figure right, that 60% of small business owners are, over 60%, are in favor of non-discrimination legislation in Ohio. That's kind of a huge number, and I'm just going to say, Raphael, hi, welcome. Thanks for getting here. I know maybe you thought I wasn't going to stop, but how could I not? Thank you for being here.
No problem. I apologize for my tardiness.
So the numbers in that sense are really sort of the science of what we do is lifting up. So the issue is how do we get our legislators really in step with the populace of Ohio on this issue? And that is part of our work. That is what we do. That's why we need all of you and need your support. We have faith communities. Over 200 faith leaders, both lay leaders and 212 faith leaders and lay leaders in churches are publicly in favor and writing letters in favor of non-discrimination legislation. So this is a huge lift. And at the same time, the level of support around this state is very, very high. If we look nationally, 433 of the Fortune 500 companies have non-discrimination policies in place. And in our own state, on the 2012 list of Jobs Ohio, the 98 companies listed there, 80 of those companies have non-discrimination policies in place. So this is not something catastrophically unusual to business. In fact, that what I was talking about before when I introduced myself, this is good for business. This is good for Ohio. Inclusiveness and everyone feeling that they live in a state that protects and reflects all of us, every single one of us, that's good for a state. That lifts us all up, not just the LGBT community. That lifts all of us up. In comparison to nationally, we are one of 30 states that has a constitutional inequality marriage amendment. And we are also, of those, I think we're one of 24 states that do not have a non-discrimination statute in place. So we are actually, I don't say we're in good company, we're not in horrible company, but it's time. It is time for us to pay attention, get this work done, do it in a way that pays attention to not just the numbers, but also what is possible in Ohio. I think the estimate of 3 to 5 years, as somebody who's doing this work, and what really, some of you know me in this room and you know me to be very methodical and intentional, but a little bit impatient. I think 3 to 5 years is a really a great estimate.
Okay, great. I want to welcome Raphael.
Thank you.
I just asked a question and I'll let Ross answer so you kind of catch up with what we're doing. And so Ross, we're...
Thanks, Mark. I have the sense that the times they are changing in Ohio as it relates to issues surrounding equality. And, you know, I'm 48 and certainly have, you know, lived through the enactment of DOMA here in Ohio. And just, you know, since I joined the legislature, obviously pay attention to polls and colleagues and what I'm hearing. And I get the feeling that things are changing. And I think that this is the right time for a methodical push towards things such as anti-discrimination legislation. Now, when I talk to people about this and people say, why are you doing this, Ross? The first thing I ask them is, you know, well, did you know that you can be fired in Ohio simply for being gay? How many people here knew that? That in Ohio, you can be pulled into your boss's office, sat down, they can look you in the eye and say, hey, I found out you're gay, you're fired. Perfectly legal. And most people reply to that, they say, wait, I thought there was a law that covered that. So the issue here, what I'm trying to point out is that, you know, we can work and should work very hard to pass anti-discrimination legislation, but it takes knowledge. Educating Ohioans, who many are going to say, I can't believe somebody could do that, because they thought there was a law that protected them. Well, there's not. And then when I tell them that, they say, well, that's right, you need to do that. And when I tell them, you know, how the bill is crafted and the protections that we've built in to protect small businesses and religious institutions and, you know, all the thought that has gone into this legislation to make it as least impacting on a business operation, but at the end of the day, you can't pull somebody in and say, hey, I found out you're living with your girlfriend, you're fired. And you know what's even more egregious? What if they pulled you in and said, I think you're gay, you're fired, and you're not really gay? And they can do that. And it just blows my mind. As an individual, it insults me. As an employer, I just cannot ever imagine doing that to someone. And yet it is perfectly legal. And the thing that really I find most baffling when talking about this legislation with some of my colleagues, I ask them, do you think somebody should be able to be fired simply because of their sexual orientation? And they say, well, no. And I said, well, then why won't you support this bill? Because we don't want to hurt small business. And I said, well, that's crazy. This is going to help businesses attract the quality employees. Yet there's some concept out there that this is going to be a detriment. People are afraid of frivolous lawsuits. I'm a business owner, as I mentioned earlier. Every day you open up your doors to your business, there's a chance that somebody's going to sue you. It's the way it is. And, you could step off the curb and get hit by a car too. It's just, it could happen. I'm not denying that a frivolous lawsuit could happen. But I happen to know that nationally, there have been 10 frivolous lawsuits deemed frivolous per year between 2000 and 2012 in states, the collective states that currently have anti-discrimination laws. That's not a whole lot when you think about this statistically. And I think, to protect someone from being, materially harmed by being fired or denied accommodation, being said, hey, you can't live here because you're gay. You and your boyfriend can't live here. Or you and your girlfriend can't eat in this restaurant. It's all legal in Ohio right now, and that's just wrong. But I have the feeling that we are moving in the right direction. And the polling that I've seen, what I consider to be reliable polling, bolsters that Ohioans are waking up to the inherent unfairness and are ready to make this law a reality. But I need everybody's help because it's a topic that many people, many of my colleagues included, feel very uncomfortable talking about. And, it's not every day that you sit in front of 100+ people and talk about sexuality. So it must be really difficult when you're just talking to one or two people about it. But we need to have the conversation, and that's where everybody here can be of great assistance in reaching out and saying, hey, this is going on, and ask the people that you run into, did you know you can be fired in Ohio for being gay? And help educate them. So if you leave here today with one thing, one charge that I'll give you, is to help educate your fellow Ohioans about the reality of the law in Ohio as it relates to LGBT and anti-discrimination in the workplace.
You want to kind of put yourself in here, Raphael?
Well, how about I do this? I'll introduce myself, and then I'll give a few thoughts. I'm Raphael Davis-Williams, and I'm an attorney here in town. My practice area is civil rights, which it is always entertaining to me to hear the frivolous lawsuit accusation thrown around, because I can assure you all the lawyers I know are really, really busy, and just filing a lawsuit just for the fun of it doesn't happen. There's a lot of work to be done. I am a native of Texas. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and I come to this issue from several different perspectives. As a individual who, part of the reason I'm late today, I was 34 years old before I ever saw accumulated snow. And this morning I allotted my usual half hour to snow, not realizing shovel snow, not realizing the difference between ice and snow. Lesson learned. But I say that because my upbringing is of an African American in the South, and for lack of a better, I try my hardest to explode any stereotype there. But some as they say, stereotypes, there's a kernel of truth in everything. And I'm from the South, and I'm from a black family, and being gay and from the South and a black family is just, there are so many contradicting elements there that just don't come together. Here in Ohio, so next month my husband and I will celebrate 9 years of marriage. We were married in Cambridge, Massachusetts back. Thank you. I appreciate that. Back in March of 2005, while we were in graduate school, and we moved to Ohio for what we thought was strictly going to be law school, and then we would leave. The one promise I made my husband when we moved here, and we started researching DOMA laws, and we discovered that Ohio had the second worst DOMA law in the country, and second only to Nebraska. And why? And some people ask me this, how do you weigh a DOMA law as being it's already bad to begin with? How's it worse? Well, because of the language where Nebraska outright says no civil unions, nothing that would, they explicitly say that you may not enter in anything that resembles a same-sex relationship. Ohio took just a hair step back and said anything that approximates a marriage. So the promise I made my husband when we moved here is that because of that, I've grown to this 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago, and I love Ohio. But there is work to be done to advance the community. Columbus community is, as probably everyone in this room knows, is so unique within Ohio for its acceptance and for the willingness of the individuals here to reach out. But I come at this issue, again, my husband says to me, because I promised that we wouldn't stay here, and we are clearly here now, that anything I can do to keep us roommates, because that's the way our relationship is recognized in Ohio. Where at this point, if we had to go through our marriage license, we got 2 copies of our marriage license, and I now see it as a badge of honor, because my marriage license is worn and tattered and torn, and it's because we've had to use it so often. We have to. Unlike those who are married in opposite sex relationships, I would venture to say some people can't even put their hands on their marriage license. I have to keep mine with me for the very purpose of proving that I'm married, so that if anything happens to me or happens to my spouse, we know that and we've had to do the power of attorney and all those extra added steps. And that gets back to the heart, at least for me, it gets back to the heart of where we are and where we'd like to be. And it should not be that my relationship, for no other reason than the fact that the person I fell in love with happens to be of the same sex as I am, should be treated any differently. And it gets to the point of understanding this. That's why I love the title, The New Civil Rights Movement. There's a lot of tension within many minority communities, especially the African American community, when it comes to comparing the LGBT civil rights movement to that occurred during the late 60s with African Americans. I saw a quote from the actress Cynthia Nixon, I think, on Facebook in the last couple of days. And it's something, I'm paraphrasing because I'm not exactly sure, but it really resonated with me, because she says, marriage, when those African Americans sat at the counters in the South at Woolworth to integrate those counters, they weren't changing the definition of eating out, they were just eating out. So how is it that granting the same rights for same-sex couples to enter into what the states have decided are legal binding unions, how does that change the complex of marriage? The complexion of marriage? It doesn't. All it is raising the people who can be fired, who have to, the situation with the teacher at Bishop Watterson back a while back. How is it that you lose your job because you are you do nothing more than acknowledge the person who you love during your mother's funeral? That to me that is antithetical to so many different things. So I could continue on, but that's.
Well, let me ask you a question. You have a dog-eared marriage license, which I think you should be proud of. What use is that in Ohio? I mean, since you were married in a state where it's legal, and it's not legal here, what can you use it for?
I tell you, so what happens in many situations when it comes, for example, we just, we traveled. We went to Washington, D.C. last week. And when we go to the TSA, we go through the airport security, even though my driver's license says Davis-Williams, his driver's license says Davis-Williams, we still have to show our marriage license to show why it is that so it's in any number of situations where we're required to present our marriage license. Insurance is another situation. Sometimes, depending on which company it is, it's unbelievable the reasons and the instances. We were, I think this was when we first started, I came to, like I mentioned, I came to Ohio for law school, and when we started at Ohio State recognized same-sex marriages or same-sex relationships, but in order for me to put my spouse on my insurance, I had to show my marriage license. We had to go through these steps, and that's exactly the point. Why is it that we have to take those extra steps that others don't have to take? We had to sign an affidavit that we shared a bank account or that we bought a car together, and these things that usually are just not questioned, and it's not enough just to say, this is my spouse, and that's it. It's never just that simple.
Wow. Some of you started to answer this earlier, but I want you to maybe be more specific about the benefits to the state, the whole state. The economic benefits is one of them. What other benefits do you see to the state if there was non-discrimination, if there was marriage equality, if everyone was a citizen equally and had equal rights, equal civil rights? What other benefits do you see for the state? Anyone who wants to go? Yeah.
I'd start with sort of the simplest answer possible. Aside from dignity, because I'm going to keep coming back to that, stability. I think that when you really think about, and it's slightly an economic argument, and you wanted me to go beyond that, but certainly economic stability, when our families are well cared for, when we have houses over the roofs over the heads of our children and our families, when we are able to go into restaurants and not be in fear, there is, it's a different universe. It is one that is stable, certainly able to be more of an economic engine, but also psychologically a stabler place to live, and a place where we are all treated with dignity. And for me, that is the bottom line.
I'd like to give us more time, but we're going to open it up now to the folks who have gathered here for lunch.
George O'Donnell. So I'm catching up on my reading of the New York Times Magazine, and I pick up a new acronym, PGP, Preferred Gender Pronoun. In your community, I'm straight. How do I address this politically correct subject of what is your preferred gender pronoun? I heard your comment about your husband. Lovely. How do I handle this, please?
Well, I will say it may be an individual situation. I had a conversation with a gentleman a couple of days ago at the Bar Association, had a Martin Luther King Day symposium, and that exact same issue came up, and I said, well, why don't we just move to spouse? I'm okay with that. I am for me, you kind of operate within the parameters that you're given. And currently in our dynamic, if I feel an obligation, a personal obligation to make sure, I lived so many, I didn't come out until I was 27 years old. So I spent so many years of my life in the closet. I absolutely refuse to do anything that would, in my personal opinion, feel like it's putting me back in the closet. So my husband is my husband, and that's because that's the way, but I'm perfectly fine I don't have a personal issue with it. I think that's one of those situations, it kind of piggybacks off of Mark's last question about some of the benefits. Some of the benefits of simply acknowledging diversity. We as a community are diverse, and so I know opposite sex couples who refer to each other as spouse. They intentionally want it to be gender neutral so that they don't have that issue. For me personally, my husband is my husband because that's the way we choose to identify ourselves. But I do believe it's a rather intensely personal issue, and my advice would be to talk to someone. Ask them. I don't think it's inappropriate to say, should I refer to? And that's what happened with my conversation with the gentleman at the symposium. It's like, I heard you mention husband. Should I say husband or spouse? It's like, I prefer husband, but you can say spouse.
That's the question. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Preferred gender pronoun is actually referencing how someone wants to be referred to. And we were just talking about this morning because I just came back from a large meeting in Houston known as Creating Change, which is probably the largest LGBT, I think it is, every year, the largest annual meeting. Fascinating, tiring in many ways, but pretty amazing. And at the beginning of each meeting, when there are introductions, people ask, please state your name and your gender pronoun of preference. And what that's referring to is how you represent yourself. So in my case, my preferred gender pronouns are her, hers, and mine. No. Sorry. Also, some of you know me, and that's true. That's actually... That's the name of my my wireless network at home too. So we got a little something going on there. But she, her, and hers would be my preferred gender pronoun because I identify as female, and it's really about gender identity, and whether someone has transitioned or whether someone is thinking about transitioning. There are people that present in different ways. We work with people in our office right now that prefer the gender pronouns of they, theirs. So it's interesting. I saw that in the New York Times too, and I was actually sort of thrilled that it was there because sometimes in our work, a lot of people aren't aware of that. So that to me, that is just another step of awareness, of public awareness, and the opportunity for us to open up, right, and learn a little bit more. Because in this job, I'll admit, I have the opportunity to really be sometimes on the cutting edge of things. And I think it's a good experience for all of us to open up a little bit more and find our way.
And I think I want to say something about in the heterosexual community where marriage has been going on for a long time. 20 years ago, an officiant at a ceremony would say, "I now pronounce you man and wife." Well, it's man and woman, husband and wife. Now people say husband and wife, but 20 years ago, man and wife was perfectly acceptable, even though it makes no sense. So there's been like a change in pronouns, even in marriage ceremonies, So I think the first question you asked, I thought was brilliant. What would you like me to call you? Just asking, because we're, discovering things here, and there's no final universal outcome that I see happening. There's always going to be individual differences with pronouns.
Mark,
Yeah.
I'd just like to add that my personal experience is I'm married to a doctor who did not take my last name. So people are always confused about, well, what do I say? And invitations to weddings are usually just any number of combinations. But I think as it relates to this case, this is, our society is becoming more enlightened as we all make this journey together. There may be some awkwardness along the way as we learn, and we hope that our friends will be patient with us as we try to, and it's very individual too. I was at a symphony fundraiser on Saturday night, and I was introduced to a lesbian couple, and the one lady introduced me to her husband. Now I never in a million years would have taking a guess at that, but, you know, it's just something we're all going to have to work through.
Awkwardness is going to happen, yeah.
Yes, my name is John McKnight, and you can refer to me as John. I like that. So, Elizabeth, you had mentioned that your polling shows that over 80% of the population of Ohio is in favor of anti-discrimination laws and moving forward in the direction that you're all talking about. And you're all talking about the momentum that we've got going. What's our biggest barrier? Why, if 80% of the people want to make it happen, I mean, what's stopping us? Obviously something is. What is it? What do we need to overcome?
Well, specifically for non-discrimination, it's right around 79%. I just don't want a fact checker to come back and say, you said 80, so 79%. But I think the biggest barrier, and Ross can chime in here, I think, as well, is it is not necessarily just educating the public, but getting our public and our voters connected to and speaking with their legislators and saying, yes, this is something we want. And also, like our small business numbers are very good, our large business numbers. So our small to medium SMEs, our small to medium enterprises in Ohio are supportive. Our large enterprises are supportive. We have to, part of our work, and this is a great question, thank you for asking it, because part of our work at Equality Ohio is making those connections. Also having people of faith, both lay people and faith leaders, talking with their legislators who believe that there's great faith opposition to inclusiveness of our community. That opposition is not there around Ohio. So it's really making that connection in fact, the work that we're doing right now, we are very micro-targeted. We are very intentional about how we are connecting people during this year and beyond to make sure that voters are talking directly to, as well as people that invest in there and give money to their candidates, so that people know, so that the legislators know exactly where people stand on this. Because we do really have a surprising amount of support in Ohio. We just haven't translated that to actual action in the legislature.
Right. Elizabeth and John, thanks for that great question. You know, I'll tell you from my perspective, having, you know, been working on this issue for a number of years and obviously having some many conversations and sometimes intense conversations with my fellow colleagues. One, I think I get back to what I referenced earlier, that Ohioans in general don't know that this situation exists. They just assume that there already is a law. So that's one thing that is preventing us from accomplishing this, is because people just assume it's, you know, they're in disbelief when they hear that this can occur. The other thing is, you know, whatever the number it is, 79%, 80%, wherever we are there, the remaining smaller percent is a very vocal, and they are not afraid to use very threatening and downright scary tactics in trying to preserve their view of the world. And that now, you know, you can say, hey, McGregor, you're talking pretty big, but you're term limited now, so, you know, so you say whatever you want. But that's not the case, because I've been behind this for most of my legislative career. But there is a political reality, and, you know, legislators do listen, particularly when people are saying bad things about them, and they get very fearful. And so, you know, I can recall the committee hearings. I think it was House Bill 1, it's had so many numbers. It was then House Bill 197 that it did ultimately pass the House. But in those committee hearings, you know, the opposition came in, and they are not afraid to say anything. And they will say it with such conviction and belief that is, you know, it scares legislators. So we need to have the 70+% of Ohioans reach out to their elected officials and say, you know, this is a good thing to do, and I'll support you. You know, let them know you got their back, and it's okay to move forward and pass this legislation.
John, I wanted real quickly to say, so that those numbers, those poll numbers, if you remember the SB 5 from a couple of years back, the difference between someone saying they will support it and actually getting out and voting, taking an active role, that's where our barrier is, and that comes in education. That's where what Ross is mentioning now is being able to educate the population. So it's easy to pick up the phone when someone asks, do you support? Well, yes, but it's a different story to get out in November to cast a vote, and that's the connection that we want to do.
Okay. Just one quick question.
Hi, Barb Seckler. Those of us in city government are soon going to be able to take a big step to victory because we can share insurance rights, health insurance rights with our husband, wife, partner, whatever you may call them. And so I'm wondering, Elizabeth, as you talk about taking a very methodical, data-driven approach, we talked a lot about ENDA, and where does gay marriage and a constitutional amendment for that fall into your thinking about timing and when that time's going to be right to go forward there, that won't be dependent on what our legislators do?
Well, that's a really great question. Thank you, Barbara. And I think that really the best answer is, and I don't want to get all kind of sloganly on you here, but one of the things that we're looking at Equality Ohio is literally just that question: how and when do we move forward in a way that we can win? And I will just go ahead and get out there. There's sometimes, particularly in the last year, that people have looked at what we're doing at Equality Ohio and saying, oh, you're going too slowly, you're not doing this, but you're not doing this fast enough. And you probably should be aware that we are really building a coalition that can actually win. So if you feel like we are waiting, I want you to hear these words. We are waiting to win. We are building support. We are not rushing to lose. And what that means for us at Equality Ohio is that we are building kind of coalition, literally the financial support, but also, frankly, people that have won marriage in every single state that currently has marriage equality. Those victories happened with the self-same organizations that are partnered with us right now. So the Human Rights Foundation, the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, ACLU of Ohio Foundation, Freedom to Marry, the actual Freedom to Marry organization that is the national organization. They're all partnered with us. They're partnered with us financially. I sit as chair of a board which has representatives from all those organizations. We hired a campaign manager, Mike Primo. We are not doing anything. We are actually building the kind of campaign that you can invest in, not only financially, but that you can invest in emotionally, that you can invest in because we are going to win. Will it be in 2014? We haven't narrowed it yet to what date it is. Most of the polling is not above 51%. And when I say most of the polling that we do and that we have raised the money to pay for is the kind of polling where it is one-on-one actual conversations with voters, not IVR, not dial through, click on your phone and go, yep, 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 nope, nope. We actually have our pollsters do real conversations, deep conversations. Why? Because we're not in a rush to lose, and we can't afford to do that in Ohio. Marriage is a wonderful thing. I'm speaking as if I'm married and I'm not, so I can say marriage is a wonderful thing. Just kidding. Marriage equality is a wonderful thing, of which I don't have much experience right now in my life. But it really takes a lot, and you have to be prepared, and you have to be intentional. And it is not one person or one organization that can make that decision, nor should one person or one organization rush forward in a way that might be damaging to not only Ohio in terms of our rights, but also perhaps to the whole movement. I urge you, if you are really interested in this issue, to speak with us, to speak with Michael. We've done a very deep dive on literally what the language, the way it's written, what it means, how it affects our movement, how detrimental it can actually be to our movement. We continue to. We don't do just one poll or one set of phone calls. We are doing a little rhyme here, a little rolling polling around the state continually. Why? Because we want to spend money on polling? Well, yes, because we want as much information both about the messaging that will work in this state, but also when we spend this money, we want to win.
I want to recognize our sponsors once more, our friends at Outlook Media down in front, our friends from the Puffin West Foundation down in front. Thank you very much. Thanks to our incredible panel today. Elizabeth, Representative McGregor, Raphael, Mark, thank you for moderating today. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll see you next Wednesday.